WHI, $1 billion worth of chaos for generations. The WHI study was not actually to investigate your menopausal symptom. You're in perimenopause and menopause. You already have these hormones. It incorrectly reported the risk of breast cancer. Sounds sexy for the first time. I think that the WHI will still have lasting repercussions in the upcoming generation. I'm here to make sure that you have that information to empower yourself. If I say hormone replacement therapy, many of you will say, I'm a little nervous, I'm a little scared. What's my risk? And why is it so hard to get hormone replacement therapy when I actually think that I need it? Hi, I am your local OBGYN. I love women, and let's talk about it. So in 2002, everybody's world changed. If you were a women's health care provider and we were giving out hormone replacement therapy and making women feel great, everything crashed literally overnight via the news and the headlines and what had come out. And the reality is, a lot of it's bogus. Deal is there was a Women's Health Initiative study, which you may have heard of, and we're going to discuss why that's the case here. So if you like this information, follow along as we continue our series on menopause and what's going on and what you should know to advocate for your best years. So deal is there was a Women's Health Initiative study, which you may have heard of. We refer to it as the WHI. That started in the mid-90s. It put together a randomized controlled study where we brought together 10,000 women between the ages of 50 and 79, and we looked to see how hormones affected them. And then it was followed for about 5 years, and all of a sudden they came out with this news flash: hormones cause breast cancer and heart attack and stroke. Okay, so what actually happens here now? You can imagine in 2002 when the headline said heart attack, stroke, and increased risk of breast cancer, 70% of prescriptions went poof, never to be seen again. Women were flushing their hormones and throwing it away because they were terrified that they had done something dangerous to their body. And then for an entire generation plus, 0 hormones just about were given. So women have been suffering for over a generation, and I think that the WHI will still have lasting repercussions in the upcoming generations, which is why this is the place to learn more so that you know what you need and aren't one of those women that suffer. So when the study was made, these 10,000 women were brought together, and the endpoint wasn't even to see if hormone replacement made them feel better in perimenopause and menopause. The actual study was designed for the purposes of seeing, did it help any major medical conditions? And these medical conditions that they primarily looked at were your bone health, your heart health, and did it increase any concerns for things like breast cancer? Okay, these all sound very reasonable. Women that actually had bad menopausal symptoms were taken out of the study. They didn't want women that had a lot of symptoms. So how do you know if it helped if they don't really have a lot of symptoms to see if it improved? Okay, that's something to think about because they didn't want to know if it helped your symptoms. Number 2, we know that the average age of menopause is 51, but the average age in this study was 62 and a half. Over 10 years older than when most women go through menopause. So what that means is that more than half of the women in this study had had almost no estrogen in their body for 10 years plus. Think about that. So it's like adding a foreign substance back into their body. Their body had said, okay, estrogen's gone. Now if we bring it in, it's like totally something we're not used to. We don't know how to handle it. And it's like a full new exposure. Okay, that doesn't make any sense because most women, when they're started on hormone replacement therapy, do it when they start to get the onset of symptoms, when they still have some estrogen in their body in their late 40s and 50s. Are we getting this now? So we have an average age that doesn't make sense, and we're looking for outcomes that have nothing to do with your menopausal relief. So what happened is in 2002, the world crashed. When we do a study, we should publish a paper and give information about why that study has pluses, minuses, information, data. Nobody cared about the data. So headlines came out first. Big error there, because then people are left to think and wonder what the heck happened and draw their own conclusions, which is not good when you're looking for fact. Okay, opinion does not equal fact. So when the headlines came out and said that hormones increase your risk of breast cancer and stroke and heart attack, That's just the only thing that was out there. All we had was a headline. So everybody freaked out for days. It took over a week for the actual paper to come out. And then once the paper came out, then the super duper smart people that know how to crunch numbers and statistics, they started looking at it, but it's not an overnight thing. We didn't have AI then to just chomp through this. So they had to look through this data and see, was this a good study? Was it a valid study? Was it a study that's telling us something important? So the data that came out in 2002 was that you increased your risk of breast cancer. And the way that they came to this conclusion was they said there was a 26% increase in breast cancer diagnoses for women that were on hormones that contained estrogen and progesterone. There was two segments, estrogen only and estrogen and progesterone. Now we're going to get into that a little bit more, but the estrogen only crew did fine. No difference, did great, fabulous results overall, but nobody reported that ever. And those women could take only estrogen because they had no uterus. They had a prior hysterectomy. The women that were on estrogen and progesterone used a progesterone that we don't typically recommend in hormone replacement therapy as of now. We think the progesterone had a little bit more increased risk for certain things. And the reality is that when it was replaced with alternative modes of progesterone, we did not see this result. But let's get back to the numbers. A 26% increase is a significant number if you take hormone replacement therapy, but that's not how statistics work. They reported that there was a 26% increase, but the reality was that the original numbers said that every 1,000 women, four roughly in that time frame in that year, would get breast cancer. And what actually happened was 5 got breast cancer out of 1,000. So instead of 4 out of 1,000, it was 5 out of 1,000, which if you actually look at the whole number, it was a 0.26% increase, not 26%. They compared the number of 4 to 5. If you compare 4 to 5, yes, it goes up by 26%. But we're talking out of 1,000. That's hugely different. So it is not actually considered very statistically significant. It could have been random. A number changing by 1 is not enough to turn the world upside down, but it did. And therefore, this was pushed out there. Anybody who had a risk was taken off of these hormones. Nobody could afford to recheck the study and see, wait a second, was this real because it only went up by that 1, or was it just chance? And that chance is what we all made our upside down decisions on. All right, so now let's get back to this. When they actually have done the studies on the estrogen side alone, which estrogen is the thing that you want to replace in menopause, they actually found that women had a longer, healthier life overall, but they didn't give you that information, did they? No. And then the second thing that they were freaking out over in the WHI is that it increased your risk of cardiovascular stroke and heart issues. All right, so that sounds pretty scary. I would think twice about this as well. What actually happened was in the study, they did not include women that had menopausal symptoms, but they included women that had hypertension, obesity, and that were of an older age to have risk factors for these things. So when they reported that they were getting higher heart risk with hormone replacement therapy, it was kind of like adding a foreign substance back to a 62-year-old. When you're in perimenopause and menopause, you already have these hormones in your body. They're there. They exist. They are going through your body. It is the withdrawal that you dislike. By the time you're 62, 72 and beyond, which a lot of these women were, they had had none of this, and most of their symptoms were gone because they had passed them by years and years and years. So the reality was that adding hormone back to somebody who was so far removed from these hormones, it was a lot for their system, and it may have increased their risk for these cardiovascular issues. But somebody, again, super smart with numbers, went back and split everything up by age and found that those risk factors for heart stuff only really applied to the women that were many, many years outside of menopause, 10 plus years. When they looked at the younger ages, and younger meaning perimenopause and menopause, less than 10 years from the onset of menopause, that risk factor really went poof and it went away. So what have we learned here? That the WHI study was not actually to investigate your menopausal symptoms. That number 2, it incorrectly reported the risk of breast cancer to you, and it didn't tell you why that risk factor factor was there and that inappropriate hormones were being evaluated, and that the numbers, statistics, which I hated when I was in school, actually matter. Sounds sexy for the first time because these numbers really make sense when you look at them as the whole picture, so that the actual relative risk was not very significant and may have just been chance. And then number three, the cardiovascular risk factors that were again spread all over the news were really primarily for women that were 10 plus years outside of menopause, especially with risk factors. But if women were started it at the right time frame, they didn't report those. So what have we learned going through the WHI study moving forward? Number one, we learned that the WHI was very flawed. There are so many more things I could tell you about it, but they're nuanced and you don't care, and I don't care to report it because I want you to take from this what you can to learn for you. Number two, the breast cancer risk was so poorly reported, and it's not really there in the way that we have been told. As long as you understand that we have a 0.26% increased potential risk of breast cancer, take from that what you will. I'm going to tell you something. They've done studies to look, do you eat French fries? And French fries have a 3 times increased risk of causing breast cancer. It's not the French fries. It's a crappy diet. But the punchline is, nobody's telling you that French fries are going to kill you. And then number three, we learned that age of onset of hormone replacement therapy does have some place in the discussion of risk. Does it mean that you can't have hormone replacement therapy if you're 10 years or more outside of menopause? No, it means that it's worth a discussion on what's important to you and that you understand the risks from me, but it's still a reasonable thing to consider. And they have done these studies as well to evaluate how they give you the hormones, and giving a safer progesterone has been very beneficial in the numbers, brought everything back to a neutral zone. And the reality is that it is a discussion that you should consider having with your women's health provider. And if you can't find one, there are telehealth platforms that exist. I'm here to make sure that you have that information to empower yourself so that you don't feel like you have no choice but to suffer without hormones, although there's still a lot of options that are non-hormonal to consider in our future. So the WHI, $1 billion worth of chaos for generations.